Okay, so I've been thinking about this thing that happened with my son, Shine, back in 2009.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was 10 at the time,
Okay.
and he was out in the yard playing golf,
Right.
as 10-year-olds do.
Right.
And one of his shots, I mean, this is just classic, it went way off course, sailed right over the fence and
Oh.
straight through the neighbor's back window. Smash. But the thing that really surprised me wasn't the broken window itself.
Yeah.
It was what happened next.
Okay.
All of his buddies, they just scattered like leaves in the wind.
Oh, I get.
Telling Shine to run and hide, the whole bit.
Oh, yeah. Classy.
But Shine, he just didn't. He just walked right over to the neighbor's house and told them exactly what had happened.
That's really interesting because it seems like there's this immediate understanding the other kids had about the consequences, right? Like that instinct to kind of protect yourself when you're in a group.
Yeah.
Shine's honesty really stands out against that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's even more memorable is how the neighbors reacted. I mean, they were so understanding, genuinely kind about it.
Oh, wow.
They even offered to split the cost of the repair with us.
Oh, wow.
And just kept saying how much they appreciated his honesty. It got me thinking, in a world where you constantly hear about people, cutting corners, trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
How does something like honesty even manage to stick around? It's like this little window-breaking incident kind of opened up this bigger question for me about what are the fundamental forces at play
Right.
that make, being truthful a viable strategy in the first place?
It's a really insightful question, and it gets right to the core of what we're going to be looking at today.
Exactly.
You've shared some really fascinating material that explores exactly this tension,
Yeah.
this kind of evolutionary push and pull between honesty and cheating, and it looks at this across the whole natural world. It's
Yeah.
not just, humans and our moral codes.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking at everything from, the social dynamics of insect colonies to, some of the really complex behaviors we see in ourselves.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source material, and we're going to try to understand those evolutionary strategies that actually encourage honesty
Okay.
and work to keep that urge to cheat in check. And I'll see this across all different types of creatures.
Right.
What surprising insights can we uncover about why, sometimes against all odds, it seems like being honest actually turns out to be the most successful approach?
Okay, so to start unpacking this, let's look at this basic idea that nature itself has evolved some pretty clever ways to make cheating a risky proposition.
Yeah.
Your sources highlight those policing systems that you see in ant, bee, and wasp colonies.
Oh, yeah. It's like they have their own miniature societies
Right.
with their own sets of rules.
Exactly.
You've got these worker ants or bees that might try to lay their own unfertilized eggs,
Right.
even though only the queen is supposed to be doing the reproducing. And what happens? The other workers, they'll actively destroy those rogue eggs.
Yeah.
It's like a built-in disincentive to cheat.
Precisely. It's like this direct cost that's imposed on the individual that's trying to kind of, game the system.
Yeah.
But one thing the sources do point out is that, this kind of cheating can still happen if that enforcement isn't really strong.
Okay.
So it's showing us that the evolutionary pressure, to be honest, it's not always 100% effective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a lot harder to kind of, spot and stop someone who's trying to get a free ride in a more complex situation.
Yeah.
Like take those wolves that you mentioned hunting together.
Right. How do you really tell if the wolf that's lagging behind is genuinely exhausted or just trying to, avoid putting in the effort?
That raises this really crucial question about how groups can detect free riding and how they deal with it.
Yeah.
Because when you have free riding, that starts to threaten the overall success of the group.
Right.
That's when we tend to see more effective policing mechanisms evolving.
Okay.
And your sources actually mention this research by Lee Allen Dugatkin.
Yeah.
He's a biologist who's done a lot of work with guppies and sticklebacks.
Right. And that's what I found so ingenious, this next part, because these tiny fish, they're basically like bite-sized snacks for bigger predators.
Right.
So how do they even dare to venture out in the open to find food?
It's a great point.
Staying informed about what those predators are up to is absolutely crucial for survival.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about these guppies and sticklebacks is that they've evolved this art of war strategy for dealing with this problem. They essentially engage in reconnaissance, they spy on the predators.
Okay.
But as you pointed out, a lone guppy or stickleback that goes on a solo mission to check out a potential threat faces incredibly high odds of becoming lunch.
Yeah, talk about a dangerous scouting party.
Right. So going it alone is incredibly risky for an individual.
So how do they manage to lower those odds? It sounds like teamwork, even when you're a tiny fish facing, a giant predator, is still key.
Exactly. And the sources highlight how by forming even small groups, like just pairs of fish, the risk for each individual,
Right.
what we could call the per capita risk, meaning the risk for each fish in that group, decreases dramatically.
Okay.
So, there's safety in numbers,
There's always safety in numbers.
but introduces a new challenge,
Right.
which is who takes the lead.
Right, because the fish that's swimming out front, that's the one that's facing the greatest danger.
Absolutely. And it would seem like natural selection would actually favor the fish that, always hangs back, let somebody else go first.
Yeah, like you first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if every fish is thinking that, then no one takes the initiative.
And nobody gets any information.
Exactly. And the whole group stays dangerously unaware.
So what's the solution? How did these little guys figure it out?
Guppies and sticklebacks, they actually engage in role swapping during these predator inspections.
Okay.
The fish that's been leading will suddenly turn around, and the fish that was following then becomes the new leader.
Oh, wow.
So it's this dynamic form of enforced cooperation
Okay.
that ensures everyone takes turns facing that higher risk at the front.
That's brilliant.
And the key insight here is that cooperation, even when it's risky, can evolve through these mechanisms that share that burden
Right.
and discourage free riding, which is really important for maintaining honest group behavior.
Yeah, it's like they've figured out a way to ensure everyone shares both the responsibility and the danger.
Right.
Talk about like an aha moment about animal intelligence right there.
Exactly.
So we've gone from, these examples of cooperation, these predator inspections, to a place where, surprisingly, cheating is also really common, which is in reproductive relationships.
That's right. And this leads us to this fundamental conflict that can exist between males and females. Okay.
Even though they contribute equally to their offspring's genetic makeup.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second because it seems counterintuitive. Same genetic stake in the game, but different agendas. So what's at the root of this potential disagreement?
Yeah, the short answer is that it comes down to their differing reproductive interests.
Okay.
So what benefits a male in terms of maximizing his reproductive success
Right.
might not necessarily align with what's best for the female, and vice versa.
Okay.
And to really understand this, we need to take a step back and look at the very origins of sexual reproduction.
Right, because before that, we're talking like 2 billion years ago.
Yeah.
It was all about asexual reproduction, making copies of yourself.
Sure.
Efficient, if you want to multiply quickly,
Sure.
but not so great for genetic diversity in the long run.
Exactly. That lack of genetic mixing left those orgasms vulnerable to all sorts of things,
Right.
like accumulating harmful mutations,
Right.
being wiped out easily by parasites or pathogens.
Makes sense. And then this really revolutionary event occurred
Okay.
where two single-celled organisms called protists, they merged together and then divided. And that was the very beginning of sex.
Wow, the ultimate genetic remix.
It was like shuffling a deck of cards before every new hand.
Right.
It solves that problem of diversity.
Okay.
But as we're about to find out, it also opened up a whole new set of challenges.
Right, those perennial battles over sex.
Exactly. And the sources talk about these two main arenas of conflict.
Okay.
First, there's competition between males and females.
Right.
And then there's competition within each sex.
Okay, so let's dive into that first battle, the one between the sexes.
Okay.
It sounds like it all started with something as basic as the size of those gametes, the sperm and the egg.
It did. And it's fascinating to think about this idea of a free writing cheat emerging right at the dawn of sexual reproduction.
Okay.
So one type of gamete started investing less material and energy,
Okay.
which allowed it to produce just a huge number of gametes. And this ultimately led to the evolution of small, numerous sperm.
So it was a numbers game, more chances to connect.
Exactly.
But there had to be a trade-off, right? Smaller gametes mean a less resource start for the resulting zygote, I would think.
You're exactly right. And this created an opportunity for the opposite strategy to evolve.
Okay.
Gametes that actually invested more resources.
Okay.
And this led to larger eggs packed with nutrients.
Okay.
So better survival chances for the zygote.
Gotcha.
And that, in essence, is how we ended up with that fundamental distinction between male and female.
Fascinating.
Your sources call it an evolutionary Magna Carta, kind of like a fundamental agreement.
Like an evolutionary truce?
Right, that allows both large, resource-rich eggs and small, numerous sperm to be successful.
Makes sense. But then we have this second battleground that emerges, which is competition within each sex.
Yeah.
So it's not just about outdoing the opposite sex,
Right.
but about being the most successful compared to others of your own sex.
Exactly. And as that macaque and banana analogy illustrates, an alpha male might dominate a female,
Right.
but that doesn't actually increase his relative fitness compared to other males.
Right.
His advantage really comes from outcompeting other males for access to resources and mates.
Gotcha.
And the same principle applies to females competing with other females.
So it's a rivalry within the team, so to speak.
Exactly.
And this difference in reproductive potential, where males can theoretically father a ton of offspring, while females are, more limited by the investment in eggs and gestation,
Right.
leads to some pretty different reproductive strategies, doesn't it?
It does. Those examples of Sultan Ismail
Yeah.
and the Russian peasant wives, they really highlight the extremes.
Yeah, the Sultan with 877 children.
Right.
And then the wives with 69 and 18. It's amazing.
It really highlights the potential extremes.
Yeah.
And, Sultan Ismail's focus was on just sheer numbers, whereas the peasant wives' focus was more on successfully raising a smaller number of offspring.
Right.
But the general trend we see across the animal kingdom supports this idea that males are often prioritizing maximizing the number of mating opportunities they have,
Right.
while females are more focused on securing resources and good genes for their offspring, since they have relatively fewer.
Yeah.
And this difference in reproductive investment creates different selective pressures.
Right.
And this can lead to different behaviors.
Right.
Males might be more incentivized to kind of deceive
Okay.
about their, availability.
Right.
And females might be more selective and also potentially deceptive about their fidelity.
Makes sense.
And that brings us to Bateman's rule, right? Females follow resources, males follow females.
Right. It's a pretty concise way to sum up these priorities.
It is. And this rule, initially observed in fruit flies, really underscores the idea of fussy females
Right.
being selective about their mates because they're making this bigger investment. And then you have these hardworking males, actively pursuing as many mating opportunities as they can.
Makes sense.
And this difference in strategy, your sources point out, this is really fertile ground for lying and deception in the whole pursuit of reproduction.
So it's not just the guys who are the notorious cheaters in the animal kingdom.
No, not at all.
Females get in on the action too.
They do.
Even in what seem like, monogamous relationships.
Absolutely.
That was surprising to learn.
Yeah, and while male infidelity might get more attention,
Right.
extra pair copulation in females is actually quite common across many species.
Okay.
Particularly in birds,
Okay.
where DNA fingerprinting has actually revealed that a significant percentage of offspring are sired by males other than the female's social partner.
Wow.
It also happens in mammals like marmots,
Okay.
and even some primate societies
Yeah.
where you'd think the dominant males would be monopolizing mating,
Right.
but it is not always the case.
Okay, so why would a female risk the potential downsides of cheating? What's in it for them evolutionarily?
So the sources outline a couple of key reasons.
Okay.
Sometimes it's about gaining access to additional resources.
Okay.
Like if another male controls a territory that's rich in food.
Okay.
Or in other cases, even if there's no direct material benefit, females might seek out extra pair matings for genetic advantages.
Yeah.
Maybe the other male has, better genes than her social partner.
Okay.
Or maybe it's about ensuring fertility.
Okay.
Or even increasing the genetic diversity of her offspring.
Right, kind of like not putting all your eggs in one basket, genetically speaking.
Exactly. It's a hedge against environmental risks, like diseases.
Right, and the examples you gave about the potato blight and Panama disease really illustrate that.
Yeah, they show how important genetic diversity can be for survival.
For sure. But there are definitely costs associated with female infidelity, right?
Yeah.
It's not a risk-free strategy.
No, definitely not. If a female is discovered, she can face retaliation from her mate. This can range from, attacks and withholding parental care in birds
Right.
to, in some cases, the extreme of infanticide in mammals,
Wow.
particularly in primates. The statistics on infant mortality due to infanticide are pretty alarming.
Yeah, that's brutal. So have females evolved any counter strategies to deal with this threat of infanticide?
So what's fascinating here is this phenomenon called the Bruce effect in rodents,
Oh, yeah.
where a pregnant female can actually terminate her pregnancy if she detects the scent of a new, unfamiliar male.
It's like a biological reset button.
Yeah. It is.
It's incredible how these pressures shape these behaviors. This also kind of connects to your own PhD work with beavers, right?
It does.
Trying to figure out how males might detect if they've been, well, replaced in the paternity stakes.
That's right. Back in the early 90s, I spent a lot of time live trapping beavers in Allegheny State Park, collecting these pheromones from their scent glands.
Okay.
The idea was to see if there were these chemical signatures that could actually indicate kinship. So we used gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, which are these techniques that allow you to essentially fingerprint the chemical makeup of the beaver scents.
Okay.
So you can see which beavers had similar chemical profiles.
Gotcha.
And then we could compare those to their family relationships that we had observed over many years.
And what did you find? Close relatives had more similar chemical profiles.
Exactly. It was really exciting.
Yeah.
It confirmed that beavers actually use these anal gland secretions, which we called kinship pheromones, to recognize their relatives.
Wow.
And they could even distinguish between close and distant kin.
That's amazing.
It turns out that beavers aren't alone.
Okay.
Other mammals, like giant pandas,
Okay.
and some rodents also use these chemical signals.
So knowing who your relatives are is important, obviously, for things like preferential treatment and avoiding inbreeding.
Right.
But in this context, it also has implications for male beavers protecting their paternity.
Exactly. For monogamous species like beavers, where males invest a lot in raising their offspring, being able to recognize their own young is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it prevents them from wasting resources on offspring that aren't theirs.
Right.
Now, this is interesting because there were those seemingly contradictory findings about extra pair copulation.
There were.
In Eurasian versus North American beavers, right?
Yeah, the study in Russia found no evidence,
Right.
whereas the one in Illinois did.
So how do you reconcile those findings?
The key seems to be the social structures of the beaver populations.
Okay.
So in high-density areas like that North American study site,
Right.
beavers often form these more complex family units
Okay.
with multiple breeding adults.
So it's not just a single pair.
Exactly. So those young beavers in the same colony that have different fathers, that's likely reflecting those family dynamics
Okay.
more than it's reflecting female infidelity.
So interesting how ecological factors can influence those reproductive behaviors.
They really can.
So moving on from how males might detect infidelity, let's talk about how females choose a good mate in the first place.
You're right.
It's not just about avoiding being cheated on.
Right.
It's about actively selecting for quality.
Exactly. And choosing the right mate is a big decision for females,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to those traits that indicate a male's quality as a parent
Right.
or the quality of his genes.
And as the sources point out, females are really good at picking up on traits that are difficult for males to fake.
They are?
Like, that music frog that builds his nest.
Oh, yeah.
That's a real, tangible investment.
It is.
A sign of effort, a sign of commitment.
Right.
And it also provides shelter for the eggs.
It does.
And the females can even distinguish between a male with a nest and a male without one,
They can.
based on how his song changes inside the hole.
It's pretty incredible.
Like a homeless male just can't replicate that.
No, he can't.
And then there were the female parakeets that were choosing males based on their puzzle-solving abilities.
Right.
That's like a direct indicator of intelligence,
It is.
which could be really important for survival in a complex environment.
Absolutely.
So these are all really great examples of females looking for honest signals of male quality.
They are.
But sometimes that information isn't so readily available, is it?
No, it's not.
There's this information asymmetry where males might try to, present a false image.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, the examples you gave about the student borrowing the fancy car.
Right.
And then, of course, Jay Gatsby.
Yeah.
And his whole, elaborate deception.
Yeah.
It really kind of hits home with that.
Yeah, it really illustrates the point.
So in those situations where males contribute little beyond their genes.
Right.
It becomes even more crucial for females to be able to tell, what's genuine and what's a facade.
Exactly.
And that's where the concept of female coyness comes in.
Right.
So it's not just about playing hard to get.
No.
It's a real evolutionary strategy.
It is.
To give females time to properly assess potential partners.
It allows them to gather information.
Okay, but as you said, coyness alone isn't a perfect lie detector.
It's not.
That's where the peacock's tail comes in, right?
Yeah.
Much to Darwin's initial frustration.
Yes. The infamous peacock's tail.
It's funny to think that something so beautiful could cause such, scientific angst.
It really is. Darwin was genuinely perplexed by it.
Yeah.
It just seems so extravagant, so useless for survival,
Right.
that it really challenged his theory of natural selection.
He famously said, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail makes me sick."
He did.
So how did they finally crack the code of the peacock's tail?
Well, that's where Amat Zahavi's handicap principle comes in.
Okay.
He proposed this in 1975, and it provided this revolutionary insight.
Okay.
The logic is that a male who can survive despite carrying this costly handicap, like this huge cumbersome tail,
Yeah.
must be exceptionally fit.
Okay.
It's a testament to his superior genes and his overall quality.
So the very thing that seems like a liability, the big flashy tail,
Right.
is actually an honest signal of his underlying strength.
Exactly. It's like saying, look, I can afford to carry this around
Yeah.
and still evade predators
Yeah.
and still find food. It's almost like an animal version of conspicuous consumption.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So the peacock's tail, the guppy's great orange spots, the elaborate plumage of birds, the massive antlers of elk,
Right.
these all require significant resources to produce and maintain.
They do.
And they often increase the risk of predation, too.
That's right.
So they act as this litmus test of male quality.
They do.
The ones who can sport these handicaps are genuinely superior.
Exactly.
And this principle, it's not just limited to the animal world, right?
Not at all.
We see it in human behavior, too,
We do.
in the ways that we signal our own abilities and qualities.
Right. Think about someone who can, play a difficult musical instrument flawlessly or solve, complex mathematical problems.
Right.
These skills might not have direct survival benefits in modern society,
Right.
but they demonstrate intelligence,
Right.
dedication, and cognitive capacity,
Right.
which are often seen as indicators of success.
That's why things like college degrees or even, standardized test scores
Yeah.
can still hold so much weight,
Exactly.
even if they don't actually measure, practical skills.
Right, but they signal something
Yeah.
about the person's underlying abilities.
Right. So these handicaps, even if they seem useless on the surface, serve this important purpose of leveling the playing field in mating and communication,
They do.
because it makes it harder for individuals to fake their quality.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that handicaps come in all sorts of forms.
Yeah.
Some are obvious, like the peacock's tail,
Right.
but others are more subtle.
Yeah.
Did you know that having high testosterone levels can actually compromise your immune system?
Oh, wow.
That's a handicap that you can't really see,
Right.
but it's still a real cost.
Right.
And then you have things like those elaborate bowers that bowerbirds build.
Oh, yeah. Those guys are like the interior designers of the bird world.
No, right? They put so much effort into these decorative structures that aren't even nests.
Yeah.
It's all about attracting females.
Yeah, it's like outsourcing the handicap to their artwork.
That's a great way to put it.
And then there are those examples that are just completely surprising.
Yeah.
Like that experiment with the mice and the cat pee.
Yeah, that one was a head scratcher at first.
I mean, females preferring males who smelled like cat pee.
Yeah.
That sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does, but when you think about it from the perspective of a prey animal,
Right.
it actually makes perfect sense.
Okay.
A male who survived an encounter with a predator, which you can tell from the stress hormones in his urine, he's demonstrated his fitness.
Right.
He's basically saying, hey, I can handle danger.
Like a survival badge of honor written in pheromones.
Exactly. And those specific pheromones, they actually change in response to that stress.
Wow. So it's an honest signal.
It is.
Incredible.
And then there are handicaps that are conditional, meaning the males only bear them when they need them, like deer antlers during mating season.
Right.
They shed those afterwards to reduce the burden.
Makes sense.
Or the horn on a pelican's beak.
Yeah.
That only appears during mating season.
Okay.
It signals that the male is a good fisher, even though it slightly impairs his vision.
Interesting.
So it's like they're strategically deploying these costly signals.
Only when they'll have the biggest impact.
Exactly.
And then sometimes these handicaps actually serve a dual purpose.
Yeah.
Like those bright colors you see in fish and birds.
Right.
Like what's going on there?
So those vibrant colors, they often come from these compounds called carotenoids that they get from their diet.
Okay.
And these carotenoids, they're not only indicators of good health and good foraging skills,
Okay.
but they also help boost the immune system. So the brightness of the colors is hard to fake.
Right.
Plus, those bright colors also make the animal more visible to predators.
Right. Which makes survival an even stronger signal.
Exactly. It's a win-win for the choosy females.
So the handicap principle It's not just about mate choice, right?
Right.
It applies to communication in general.
It does.
Any situation where you need to honestly signal something.
Exactly. Any trait that's hard to fake can be used to signal all sorts of things,
Okay.
from dominance to willingness to cooperate.
Okay.
For example, think about the status badges in Great Tits.
Okay.
The size of the black stripe on their chest actually indicates their social rank.
Okay.
And this is enforced through actual fights.
Oh, wow.
You can't fake a bigger stripe. You have to earn it.
Right.
Or the Gamble's quail's crown feather.
Okay.
That signals either aggression or submission.
Interesting.
Again, these are honest signals because there are real consequences if you try to fake them.
It's like those weight classes in boxing, Your badge of honor has to match your ability to actually back it up.
Exactly. And this honest signaling even extends to communication between different species.
Oh, right, like that cleaner fish and their credit scoring system.
I love that example.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, the client fish keep track of which cleaner fish are doing a good job
Right?
and which ones are cheating by taking bites of their flesh.
That's right.
And they'll actually favor the honest cleaners in the future.
It's like interspecies reputation management.
It is. It's amazing.
And then you have the classic examples of deer and antelope stotting or flagging their tails at predators.
Yeah,
Which is basically a way of saying, I'm fit, don't even bother chasing me.
exactly. It's an honest signal of their ability to escape.
So where do we humans fit into all of this? I mean, we're certainly no strangers to honest signaling, right?
We're not. In fact, a lot of human behavior can be understood through this lens.
Okay.
For example, those physical traits that are associated with female beauty, like clear skin, a certain waist-to-hip ratio,
Okay.
those are thought to be signals of youth and fertility.
Okay.
And across cultures, we see these open competitions like singing, dancing, wrestling
Right.
that allow individuals to honestly display their skills and attract potential